Yeah. Awesome. Great. So, what sorts of oh yeah, did you see the link to the study guide that I posted there?
On Canvas.
Yeah, in the announcements. It's okay if it's
Um,
not there. It's just there's a link to it on the in the announcements, and then I also posted it in the modules section.
Gotcha. Let me check really quick.
Okay. And if not, I'll just I can just share my screen, and probably better to do that anyway. Uh, and just kind of review the points as we go forward. But anyway, well, you know what? I'll just do that. I'll just go ahead and share screen.
Okay,
I'll share my screen, and then you can view that. Let's see.
great.
Yeah. Where is it? Okay. Make sure I do that. Okay. Oops. Share screen. There we go. Share. Okay. Cool. All right. Are you able to see this?
Yep.
Okay. Awesome. Cool. Yeah. So, is there something that we have gone over the last few weeks that you specifically want to make sure that we tackle and address head on, or shall we just kind of go straight down the list and review the moral theories that we did during the second half?
I think we could just go straight down the list.
Cool. Yeah. It makes sense. All right. Cool. So yeah, utilitarianism is might be maybe the most straightforward and maybe the most intuitive, perhaps that we've looked at. And so this is generally, so in a sense, one of the ways of thinking about utilitarianism is taking a very similar idea that we saw with egoism, which is the idea that um, you want to maximize the good as much as possible. In egoism, you do that for yourself, but with utilitarianism, you're considering um, many people. You're considering a group, right? And in theory, you could consider everybody, but it's sometimes usually it's impractical to consider like everybody on the planet. So oftentimes, what we do is we add a caveat saying generally for everybody considered, everybody that you're considering, the utilitarian wants to maximize the good for everybody, right? Um, yeah, are there examples of utilitarians or utilitarian decision making that you're familiar with or that you see in popular culture or media elsewhere?
Um, yeah, well, I actually wrote my paper on that. Wrote it on steroid use in sports.
Hmm.
Players
Oh,
taking
sure.
it for the benefit of their team. So
Yeah.
that was kind of what I wrote about.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. At the risk of yeah, right. And so this opens up not just yeah, not just an application of the principle, right? So the idea that steroid use could be justified under utilitarianism if it does, kind of maximize the good for the team.
Sure.
But of course, and as you recognize, there are some problems with that, right? So it's important for the final exam and generally for moral decision making to recognize both the positives and the negatives of each of the moral theories.
Yeah.
And so, of course, and again, yeah, that's right. And as you recognize in your paper, this utilitarianism can justify some things that we ordinarily would say are morally wrong, right? So, steroid
Mhm.
use can give some people an unfair advantage over others, but at the same time, it's good for your team, right? So,
Right.
yeah, um, yeah, good. Anything more to say about that specifically, or
Not off the top of my head,
okay?
but
All right.
yeah.
I'm tempted. There's a great um there's a great video on there's a great clip from it's like one of those vintage Saturday Night Lives where
Mhm.
they have gosh, this is probably from 1991 or something. It's very very old, and it's the all drug Olympics, right? So the Olympics where everything is permitted. You can take anything you want and completely buff yourself up and then
Love that.
compete. And it shows this guy who's right about to lift like a record-breaking, 685 pounds or something, and it goes over all the different drugs that he's taken, or at least this concoction. And Kevin Nealon, who's doing the news at the time, he says, and some sort of fish paralyzer, or and he goes and he goes to lift the barbells, and his arms just come off, right? He stands up, and there's all this blood coming out of his the sockets and everything. Anyway, okay. So right, yeah. So is it the case? And of course, in the text, in the Rachel's text that we've been going over, they do talk about how in some cases there may be some justifications for legalizing certain kinds of recreational drugs, because overall the problems associated with it being criminal and being kind of a drain on law enforcement may be bad enough that it would just be better to have that relief and just make this particular recreational drug legal, right? Probably not for all recreational drugs. There are certainly some that really do mess people up and do cause more harm than good, but it's possible that legalization of some recreational drugs cause more good than harm. And of course, that doesn't necessarily apply to your topic of steroid use, because steroid use isn't necessarily recreational. It's to give somebody an advantage in a certain way, right?
Yeah, right.
Yeah. Yeah, cool. So, all right, yeah. Other things about utilitarianism that are important to recognize is that it's by and large a consequence-based moral theory. So the reason why you do something doesn't matter really at all. What really does matter is the effects of what you're doing, right? So that's really what's important. That's how you evaluate an action based on its consequences, right? Yeah, anything that might be a little bit unclear about utilitarianism at the point, or anything that you'd want to zoom in a little bit more on?
No, I think I'm good with that.
Okay, cool. The other thing to mention about utilitarianism, just really quickly, is that some have, and this you probably remember this, but some have actually um, rolled out utilitarianism as almost like a kind of like an accounting, almost like a ledger, right? So as if you can take a kind of balance or sum of all of the happiness and all the pain, or all the pleasure and all the suffering, and you can
Right.
kind of create a total, not just for individuals but for society writ large. And you can kind of look at the way different actions or different actions will have an impact on society, and will it just generally, almost literally mathematically cause more happiness than suffering. And if that's the case, then that's the action we should take, right?
Mhm.
So now that, of course, and another drawback is that some people are going to be kind of left behind. It's possible that there are some scenarios where society in general will benefit. The overall happiness will increase. However, there might be a few individuals, or maybe even a few groups or pockets of society, who will suffer immensely in order for the good to be maximized across society. So there are some terrible injustices that could be inflicted on some people in order to make a better society. So that's an area in which utilitarianism seems to have some holes, right? It seems to have some flaws, because there are some people who will inevitably slip through the cracks and have a lot of trouble, right?
Sure.
Some people bring up, for example, well, actually, yeah, two important examples. One of them is slavery, right? If you enslave, say, 5% of the population, you get free labor, and most people benefit, right? However, for those slaves, there's a profound injustice that's inflicted on them. Also, the ways in which hi Ben, I see Ben has joined us. Another way in which utilitarianism is very relevant is right now with the coronavirus, right? This is people are, as we speak, trying to figure out at what stage and to what extent we open up the economy in order to keep things, get people employed again, and try to guarantee or reaffirm the prosperity of the country and the well-being of the public. And yet, the faster we open it up, the more likely it is that a few more people will die, right? So we have this balance, right? That we have to kind of take into consideration. Is it worth the death of a few people to get the economy running again, right? And so, of course, utilitarians oftentimes might say, well, maybe it is worth the death of a few people in order to maximize the good by having them rolling this out. An example that we can think of now, that there are some important differences between this example and infectious disease, because but we permit people to drive cars, right? Even though we know, I mean, we don't necessarily know for sure, but we know with great probability that hundreds of people are going to die on the road in a given month or so. I'm not sure exactly what the numbers are, but we're pretty sure that some people are going to die as a result of permitting people to drive. So that's a kind of utilitarian accounting of the overall benefit of being able to drive against the overall deficit or the overall problem with some people dying as a casualty of that. So the utilitarian decision we make, right, to drive, right? Okay. Yeah. All right. Anything else on utilitarianism that we might want to go over? Ben, do you want to? Okay. Yeah. So Ben, if you want to chime in, feel free to unmute yourself. You're permitted to do that. I don't have any control over that. So, well, I haven't taken any control over that. Right? So, okay. So moving on to Kantianism, right? So this one may be a little bit more complex, but if in a way, one of the things that I tried to kind of explain it in a way that might be a little bit intuitive. So Kantianism has everything to do with how you are treating other human beings, and of course, I know utilitarianism sort of does too. But the question that is asked by Kantianism has to do with whether you are respecting the other person as a human being equal in value to yourself, right? And so with the recognition that all human beings are, by virtue of being human, Kant puts it in terms of being a rational moral agent, or the fact that human beings are the ones who assign value. And so therefore we all have equal value because all of us are rational moral agents, at least is the idea. So that means that I have certain duties towards every other human being. I have to treat every other person the way that I would want to be treated, because that person that I'm treating is equal in value to myself. So I have to treat them the way I would want to be treated. To do otherwise would be to treat them as if they are lesser than I am, right? If I mistreat somebody, then I'm saying with my action, with my mistreatment, I am saying that they are less valuable than I am. And Kant says that that's absolutely wrong, right? It would be hypocritical because I would be pretending like I'm more important than somebody else, or that certain rules apply to others but not to me, or vice versa. Right? So does that kind of make sense, or have we kind of latched onto that idea? In a sense, it's almost like it's kind of like the golden rule, right? But one of the major differences between the golden rule and Kantianism is that Kant tries to kind of develop a very, very logically consistent basis for the golden rule. Right? Yeah. Okay.
That makes sense.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. So one of the things that I that kind of helps me, I don't think Kant ever quite put it this way, but it's kind of the way that I think about it in my head is this kind of idea that to act is to permit, right? So if I do something, then basically I'm declaring with my action that I believe this action is acceptable, right? So automatically, this happens necessarily, right? So it couldn't be otherwise. It couldn't be otherwise than by performing an action, I declare that I think that action is okay, obviously, because I did it, right? So if I did the action, I think it is okay, right? Okay, what that means then is that since every other human being is equal, then I'm permitting every other human being to do the same thing. Right? I'm permitting everybody else to do exactly the same. So, so to act as permit is to permit. So in order to be logically consistent in my ethics, that means that anytime I perform an action, I have to be okay morally with other people doing the same thing. So if I lie, then basically I'm giving everybody else permission to lie to me because by lying, I have said lying is okay. Right? It's okay because if I did it. So I permit everybody else to lie to me. If I steal, then I permit everybody else to steal from me. Right? I'm giving permission to everybody else. So Kant says this is how we know for sure in Kant's view. This is how we know for sure that lying is always wrong and that stealing is always wrong because I could not and I would not want to live in a world where lying is okay or where stealing is okay or where murder is okay. I would not want to live in that world. And so I must not perform those actions. Right? All right. Is just to pause there. Is that making sense so far?
Yeah, that's great.
Yeah. Okay. So notice in the phrasing of that, right? So that if permitting everybody else to do the same. Well, when I talk about everybody else, really I'm talking about universalizing, right? So Kant asks the question about whether something can be universalized. Um, could I live in a world where everybody could morally do this, right? Can you universalize that, right? So I think in class I gave this example where uh, oh yeah, this might be helpful for thinking about other moral theories too. So we were at the YMCA, and forgive me if I had mentioned this in the class. I think I did, and I'm repeating myself. But we're at the YMCA, and there was my kids who were my kids wanted to swim in this kind of little water park area, a splash park area of the YMCA. And there was a sign there that said, if your child is, in this splash park area, then the parent must be within arm's reach of the child. But my kids were old enough they could, take care of themselves and so forth. So I wasn't terribly worried about them, and I didn't really wasn't worried about them interfering with other kids too. It didn't seem like it was much of a problem. However, that rule said that parents have to be within arm's length. All right. So, um, if I think about this situation, whether it's okay to let my kids play outside of arm's reach, if we think about that in utilitarian terms, well, does it maximize the good? Well, my kids are happier when they're kind of able to move around the splash park. I did not want to go in there, and so I wasn't a huge fan of that. I just didn't want to get involved. So it maximized my happiness, and the other kids seemed to be fine with it too. So generally, everybody was fine. In fact, if anything, my kids going in the splash park freely maximized the good. So for from a utilitarian perspective, even though technically it bent the rules, even though technically we were disobeying the rules, still it maximized the good. So utilitarians would say, yeah, generally should be fine, right? Egoists, I think you naturally can see why an egoist would say, well, it maximizes the good for myself because I don't have to go in the pool and I can just kind of, sit on the sidelines and my kids can be happy. Yeah, it maximizes the good for myself and so forth, right? All right, but and I was actually in this moment with my wife there. We were having a conversation, and I was going through various moral theories and asking whether each moral theory how each moral theory would assess our allowing their kids to go in the pool, even though it was against the rules technically. And pretty much every moral theory would have permitted it, except for Kantianism, right? Because once again, from Kant's view, what happened to it is when we signed up for the YMCA, we basically made a contract. We made a promise to follow the YMCA's rules, right? We made a promise. And so Kant, this is another area where um, Kant takes his moral principles pretty seriously. If I make a promise, then that means that I'm committed to that promise, right? And then if I fail on that promise, then I'm basically saying it's okay to break promises, right? And if I do that, then that means I grant everybody else permission to break promises they've made to me. If they and so do I want to live in a world where people can make, and we're back. Sorry about that. Connection drama again. Okay. And then I think, do I need to unmute you? There we go. Okay. Okay. But you're free to unmute yourself. Yeah. Okay. There we go. All right. Let me do the share screen again. Sorry about that. Is everybody? Can everybody hear me? I think so. Yeah. Okay. Cool. We're all set. All back. Okay. Good. Sorry about that. Okay. So, yeah. All right. So, so the idea of like breaking a promise and something. Could we live in a world where it's okay to break promises? And Kant says no. You wouldn't want to live in that world, right? So let's say somebody promises you that um, that they're gonna pick you up from school or something like that, right? And then they don't, right? Or if you promise to lend somebody money, right? Or think about all the times we draw a contract, right? If you buy a car, that's some kind of contract. If you buy a house, there's some sort of contract. If people are allowed to break promises, then they're allowed to break contracts, right? Could we live in that world? That would be very, very unstable, and we would not want to live in that world, right? Okay. So in some cases, there are whole categories of action, right? So as we put in the study guide, lying, stealing, murder, those kinds of things Kant would insist are categorically wrong. In other words, in every case of lying, in every case of stealing, in every case of murder, they're always wrong because again, they are actions that cannot be universalized. It's not. There are no in every case of lying, I am treating somebody as if they are less valuable than I am. Right? So if I lie to somebody, I'm saying that I am more important than you because especially if when the person lies to me, I would not be okay with that. Right? If I would not be okay with them lying to me, yet I lie to them, I'm giving myself a higher moral status than I am the other person. Right? And that's inconsistent. Right? It's illogical. Right? To be all Spockish. So, in a sense, yeah, you can kind of think of Immanuel Kant as like a moral Mr. Spock in a sense. Right? Okay, yeah. So the categorical imperative refers to things that are categorically wrong. There are no circumstances under which certain things are acceptable. Right? The whole category, all incidents of lying and stealing are categorically wrong. Right? Okay. So now you can see as we talk about this, Kant really does not care about consequences. This is not a consequence-based theory. So in other words, if I'm thinking about lying to somebody because I know that a lie will maximize the good, say, notice that sounds fairly utilitarian. All right, lying to somebody will maximize the good, or lying to somebody will save lives, right? In one case, right? Or stealing something will save lives, right? Or in some dreadful cases, murdering somebody might save other lives, right? Kant says in all of those circumstances, it's still morally wrong, even when the outcome would be favorable, right? Because you're still betraying your duty to your fellow person. You're still treating that person as if they are less valuable than you are, right? Okay, so even when the consequences seem to justify it, it's not justified under Kantianism. Right? Okay, so just kind of elaborate on that. Oh yeah, so going back to the coronavirus issue, right? Is it worth letting a number of people die or knowing that they will die in order to preserve the economy? Kant might say that what you're doing is you are using those people who are dying in the hospital, you're using their deaths to improve the economy. And you can never do that. You can never use somebody as a tool to yeah. Okay, so yeah, cool. I didn't realize you could do this. How do I uh oh, there
I'm
we go.
unmuted.
There we go. Cool. Hey Claire.
I think, hi, how are you?
Good.
I think that's kind of interesting in putting it like that, because we don't know that they're guaranteed to die. And in some cases, I would argue that there is an amount of personal responsibility within that too, where if we decide to open the economy, it's on everyone to be conscious of what they're putting out there. So that's you knowing if you live with someone who is older and more at risk, you take the necessary precautions. But I don't know that you can necessarily say, like, by opening up the economy, we're sacrificing those people, because I think it comes down to the way individuals who interact with those people end up interacting with them, and then at the same time the way those people act, because I've heard some stories of people who are older and at risk and probably should be taking more precautions who don't and are just like whatever. And so I don't know, I just think that's interesting.
Yeah, that's an excellent point, Claire. Right. So yeah, absolutely. So yeah, where does the responsibility lie? Right. So if I, for example, if I go to and I have to confess, I've done this. If I go to a store without a mask on, right, and then and with the awareness that I'm putting people at risk, right, then yeah, this is something where I'm taking an action that could lead to other people's deaths. But yeah, you rightly point out that we don't really know for sure that it's not, that it will cause more deaths, and really the onus is on the individual to be more vigilant and be careful about what they're inflicting on themselves and others, right? Um, and oh shoot, I was gonna develop that idea, or at least or agree with it in other ways. Um, yeah, personal responsibility was. Um, I can't remember exactly how I was gonna put it. Yeah, but that's a really good point. So Kant is somebody who respects autonomy, but at the same time would insist that other people have duties towards others, right? Duties towards other people. Right? Oh, right. And also, Kantianism is especially helpful when we don't know the outcome, right? So when we don't really know what's going to happen, right? When we don't know the consequences or the effects, right? Of course, because I mean, for utilitarians, when we don't know the effects, they're in big trouble because their moral theory is entirely based on consequences, right? Um, but for Kant, consequences are not quite so important. It's how you are behaving directly towards the other person. That's close to what I think I was going to point out. Yeah, it's your actions towards a person that are more relevant, right? Directly towards a person. Yeah. Okay. Good. Yeah. Good. Any other comments there about Kantianism and the idea of using somebody as a tool for some other means? So one of the principles that is a way of kind of encapsulating this idea is the means end principle, right? So the idea that human beings are inherently valuable, right? One person put it in terms of human beings don't necessarily have value as much as they have dignity, right? And dignity is something that is a whole other dimension, infinitely higher and more important than value, say. But that's one way of thinking about it. Another way of thinking about it is that human beings have intrinsic value, whereas objects and even animals have instrumental value, right? So objects and animals and plants, they exist for something else. So they exist for a purpose, right? For use, for human use. But human beings are supposed to be the recipients of that benefit the they are at the business end of those objects, right? So to use somebody, right, or to manipulate somebody, or uh, to uh, um, to use somebody as a means to an end, right? To use somebody as a way that I'm achieving a goal, um, is is morally wrong on its face, because I'm treating that person as an instrument. In other words, I'm treating that person as if they are less than human, right? Treating that person with less value than I should a human, right? So this is yeah, commonly called the means end principle, right? So I can never use a human being as a means to an end. End meaning goal or purpose, right? I can't use a human towards a purpose. I can use a thing towards a purpose, but I can't use a human being towards a purpose. And yet this does raise some interesting questions that have to do with uh, that have to do with like employment or transactions. Like when I go to a store and I buy something from a clerk, am I using that clerk in order to get what I want? And um, so Kant would say that here's an interesting Kantian way of thinking about business and business transactions, right? So there's one way of thinking about business where I this is the non-Kantian way of thinking about business, where I say my goal is to make a profit or to build a business. And so in order to make that happen, I'm going to use employees and I'm going to use customers. I'm going to use the employees to help me generate the product or provide the service. And I'm going to use customers to buy that service and then give me money, right? Or give my business money or whatever. So that's a non-Kantian way of doing it. I'm thinking about it in terms of using people, whether they're employees or whether they're customers, for an end, for my goal, my aim. Okay, so if we think about it in a Kantian way, on the other hand, then in this case, what we're doing is I say I might have exactly the same business. I might, right? But instead, I am saying that the profit that I get and the sales that I make, and the products that I supply, those are the means. Those are the tools that I'm using in order to benefit my employees and customers. Right. So the goal is to employ people and pay them well, and the goal is to serve customers. Right. So if that's my goal, if that's the goal of my business, then it has the Kantian stamp of approval, right? So because that way, human beings are the end. Human beings are the goal of my actions, and the profit or the inner workings or the resources of the company, the assets, those are the means, right? Those are the instruments. Those are the tools by which I benefit my employees and my customers, right? Okay, so there are Kantian ways uh, of performing transactions and so forth, right? As long as the human being is the benefit of the human being is the goal of your action. Oh, also keep in mind, you are also a human being, right? So to perform an action that benefits yourself, that's fine. You are equal to everybody else, right? You're supposed to do the actions that benefit yourself, but you have to also be benefiting the people that you're transacting with, right? They can't be the tool. They have to be um, the goal. Right? Okay. Any need for clarification on that or any more details? Connection issues. Okay. All right. In this case, well, I don't see. I think people either have left or okay. I'm gonna go back to share screen. Um, and here's what I'm gonna do. I'm gonna continue to record, and if more people arrive, if people come back, then let's continue. So or everybody can watch this video once I post it. All right. So yeah, okay. So finishing Kant. I'm sorry about the connections issues. Gosh, there should be a better way to do this. Let me make sure that I've got something stable. I'm just gonna pause for a second. Okay. Where do I pause? Okay, and we're back. So I apologize for that. The okay, just moving forward, there is also a chapter we dealt with that has to do with the ethics of care. This is certainly moving us more in a direction kind of away from principles and from rules and more towards in a sense, for lack of a better expression, the heart, right? So thinking about our desires and our motivations, right? And thinking about whether we care about people. So might be kind of interesting that one of the one of the ongoing frustrations for people who are concerned about ethics and who are concerned about justice and living in a fair society, people who are concerned about that oftentimes are frustrated when uh, some some ethics, some ethical principles are very, very clear, right? They are known, right? And people, there some are mystified as to, well, why don't more people just simply follow the golden rule, right? Why don't they? It's not that difficult, right? Why don't do that? They do that, and one of the straightforward answers is that not enough people simply care. Some people just don't care about behaving morally. Right? Some people don't care about others or the well-being of other people. So this really does kind of cut to the heart of ethical uh, difficulties or ethical issues. When people care, then actually it seems to kind of undercut a lot of the or at least go beyond might be a better way of thinking about it. Many of the other theories about what makes things ethical, right? It seems to kind of transcend that because if even for children or people who are uneducated, even for people who don't have a very strong mental capacity, if they care about others, then they are more likely to automatically behave more ethically and they're likely to fulfill their duty towards other people, to put it in Kantian terms, or they're more likely to maximize the good for everybody considered, to put it in utilitarian terms, even without thinking too much about what would a utilitarian do or what would Kant do. Somebody who simply cares, all right, is going to behave morally. So ethics of care have to do with cultivating somebody's motivations towards the benefit of other humans, right? And so there are people who have developed this as a kind of as a moral principle, as an attitude towards moral thinking and decision making, right? So somebody, if you care, then that's kind of the gold standard for moral behavior and moral decision making. Right? You care. One example, it's the examples mentioned in the text. So about what is more meaningful, what is more effective, and what is better. A parent who raises kids and feeds them and teaches them because the parent does it as a matter of duty, right? Because the parent says, well, this is my responsibility, so I'm going to do that. Or is it more meaningful for a parent to do that because the parent genuinely cares about the children? And I think most people would say and recognize, and I think psychologists would also affirm that parenthood done by caring parents is going to be more effective and result in more ethical children. Right? One would hope, right? So okay, ethics of care, and that's largely what we do. Now, of course, there is a kind of feminist angle to this, and I think that's also very valuable to take into consideration. Many of the people we've been looking at, maybe with a few exceptions, Ayn Rand, for example, is being one exception, but a lot of the theorists we've looked at are male, right? And so, in a sense, they bring a kind of like a bit of a gendered male approach to things. And of course, I wanted to add dozens of qualifications to that because there is not necessarily a gold standard for what it means to be male or what it means to think like a man. There's not. But however, there are tendencies, right? There are proclivities, and so yeah, men tend to think a little bit more in terms of justice and rules and principles. Women tend to think a little bit more in terms of care, right? And motivation, right? Inspiration. So that's a little bit of kind of the background for how an ethics of care emerged, right? Okay, but then moving over to virtue ethics, notice how the ethics of care, which is a very, very modern approach, right, developed in the 20th century, modern approach, jives kind of with a very ancient approach to ethics, which is virtue ethics, right? So going on to the next moral theory here has to do with the cultivation of character, right? So the areas of being a human that you're good at, right? The talents or skills or strengths that you have as a human being has to do with virtue. All right. So now there are other videos that I've put up that deal with virtue ethics head on. So I might kind of defer you to those videos in lieu of an overview here. Just to flag up though, just a few of the key ideas, just very briefly, is this notion of eudaimonia, right, which is meaning human flourishing or general well-being, right? So notice eu is usually a prefix that has to do with good, right? Euphony, for example, euphoria, right? Eudaimonia was well-being, right? Flourishing. So virtue ethics have to do with how we are going to live lives that in which we flourish and which we live up to our potentials. Right? Okay, and cultivating the virtues, courage, justice, compassion, patience, moderation, cultivating those enable human flourishing. Right. Now, one of the ways you can identify those, and again, this was addressed in some of the videos, one of the ways you can identify virtues is by looking at the golden mean between two extremes, right? So between a deficit in that virtue, like if you don't have enough courage, you are going to behave in a cowardly fashion. Right? You're going to recoil. You're not going to be brave enough to face intimidating circumstances. Or you're not going to take any risks, right? If you don't have enough courage, right? In other words, if you're cowardly. If you have too much courage, right, it's possible to have an excess of courage. If you go all the way to the other extreme, you're more likely to behave brashly. You're more likely to behave maybe a little bit foolishly in a way that could get yourself or other people hurt, right? You might take too much of a risk, right? I'm reminded of a scene in Austin Powers, the first Austin Powers, where he goes into a casino and he's trying to, show his stuff. And there's another player at the blackjack table who he has like he has 16, right? And generally when you have 16 and if you take another card, you're actually fairly likely, or no, was it 17? You're fairly likely to go over, right? Go over 21 and then you lose the hand. So he says hit me, and the dealer says, "Sir, I suggest you stay." And the player says, "I'd like to live dangerously," right? And then it turns out he gets a good card, right? And he's got 21 or something. But then it goes over to Austin Powers, and he only has 5, right? And Austin Powers also wants to impress people, and he says, "I'll stay." In other words, he won't take a card, even though every card he gets would be fine, right? So I'll stay. I'll stick with my 5, right? I also like to live dangerously, he explains, right? But of course, he has no chance of winning the hand, right? If he just sticks with his 5, right? So anyway, that's foolishness, right? So the opposite of courage, you could say, or an excess of courage, right? Okay. All right. So finally, and I went through this in a very recent video, so I might not spend too much time talking about this. The idea of like a satisfactory moral theory. What does it mean to have to cultivate a moral sense or a moral framework for yourself, or a general moral attitude for yourself that is satisfactory? In other words, that kind of meets best practices, that meets general standards for what a legitimate moral theory might look like, right? What is that? So really, 2 important ingredients, really 3. Modesty, right? That you don't make too much of yourself, right? The authors put it as morality without hubris, and morality without excessive pride, right? Or arrogance. Modesty in the fact that you are a human being, you are flawed, you're biased, you have a limited perspective on things. Our vision is generally pretty narrow. We need to keep that in mind as we cultivate our moral framework, as we behave and treat other people. Reason, also as the other one. In other words, we have to watch out for contradictions, watch out for hypocrisies in our moral theory. All right, reason helps us to do that. Think carefully about how we want to approach our lives, right? What sort of schema we want to build for ourselves and others, right? Now, of course, it's impossible to deliberate very carefully over every last little decision you make that affects others. You can't necessarily do that. So sometimes we can talk about an attitude, right? And deliberate over the overall approach you're going to take to life and treating other people. So modesty, reason, and then care, right? The fact that you are motivated to treat other people kindly. You're motivated towards being a moral person, towards cultivating the virtues. Right? Okay. The authors also, and again, this is something that was dealt with in another video, so I probably won't spend too much time talking about this then here. The multiple strategy utilitarianism, the resourcing of multiple moral theories, all for the ultimate utilitarian goal of maximizing the good. So it's definitely utilitarianism, because the end goal of the use of these moral theories, the end goal is still to maximize the good for everybody considered, right? That's the utilitarian. That's what makes it utilitarian. But you may draw from other moral theories in order to make that happen, right? Okay. And then finally, again, John Rawls' theory of justice, given, I think, too little treatment in the text, but something that's, I think, is very important for people who got an unlucky draw in that natural lottery. It's important that if we want to live in a just society, it's important that we make sure that they are cared for, right? That they're given opportunities and given the ability to live the best life that they possibly can, given the disadvantages that they were born with, right? So at the same time, though, we do need to make sure that those who do put forth an effort, those who do want to make a lot of themselves, are also able to and free to earn what they deserve, right? To get what they deserve, right? So we got to hold those kind of things in balance, right? Okay, I hope this has been a helpful review. I will post this video onto Canvas and make sure that you all are able to view it. But also the study guide is already up there, so you should be able to find it. Keep in mind that the final exam will be very similar to the midterm exam in its structure. It's going to be multiple choice. I'm not sure how I did give you the option during the midterm exam to write a short answer into the margins. I'm not sure exactly how to do that with Canvas. Maybe I'll make some sort of text window available that will allow you to kind of explain some of your answers. I'll try to see if I can figure that out. But it'll be multiple choice. Once again, one student was asking, and I'll put this in an announcement as well, since this is at the end of the video, but one person was asking about the timing of the exam. Since it's online, online things are almost, kind of by default asynchronous. So I'm going to make the exam available for a larger window of time. I think I'm probably going to make it available for over the course of maybe a day or so. I'll probably do that to give everybody the opportunity to take it when all bets are off, considering everybody's quarantined, right? So anyway, but I will flag that up when I post the exam. All right. Okay. Please email me if you have any questions. I'll make a much more concerted effort to respond to your queries in as timely fashion as possible. And by and large, no, I think that's it. Thank you so much for following this course. Oh yeah, the paper assignments are graded as well, so you'll be able to see those and view those. And let's see what else. Are there any other kind of updates? I think that's generally it. Oh yeah, participation grades as well. Generally, if you've been kind of tuning in, or if you've been chiming in throughout the semester, then generally I think you could be fairly confident that your score is gonna be optimal. So I know I intended to put out a rubric for participation earlier, but I didn't end up putting out a rubric. But that's it's basically a way to incentivize your participation, your cooperation in our discussions, right? Okay, thanks so much, and good luck on the final exam. I hope you enjoy writing that second paper as well, and I hope that you are safe and healthy, and I look forward to the curve being flattened and things returning to normal as much as they might be able to. I hope that there's not a new wave of the virus, and I hope that everything smooths over very nicely, right? And that we're all careful, but at the same time, productive and supportive and compassionate of one another. All right, thanks. Okay, bye-bye.